The wasteland stretched out like the corpse of a long-forgotten world. Everything felt dead. The air, the ground, even the light seemed gray and lifeless. Ahead, the industrial complex loomed, a decaying giant of concrete and steel. Its jagged edges cut against the ashen sky, a tombstone for whoever had the misfortune of wandering too close. I adjusted the rifle on my shoulder, keeping my steps slow and deliberate. Every sound out here mattered. A careless step could mean the difference between life and becoming something's meal. I glanced back, making sure the arrows I'd drawn with chalk on the pavement were still visible. My escape route. My lifeline. The building groaned in the wind, its shattered windows staring out like empty eye sockets. The closer I got, the more the air changed. It was heavy, thick with the scent of rust and something sour, something wrong. I stepped through the tilted doors, my boots crunching over broken glass and gravel. Inside, the silence was oppressive. It wrapped around me like a shroud, muffling even the sound of my breathing. My fingers brushed the chalk in my pocket, a subconscious need to remind myself I could still leave. The first room was stripped bare, just a husk of broken machinery and dust-covered floors. The walls were scrawled with faded graffiti, half warnings, half prayers. I stopped to mark an arrow on the ground before moving on. The second room told a different story. Tools were scattered across the floor, their rusted edges glinting faintly in the dim light. A wrench, a pair of pliers, and a saw, coated in something thick and black. My stomach churned when I realized it wasn't grease. The workbench in the corner had deep gouges in its surface, like someone had been hacking away at it. Then I heard it. A faint shuffle. My heart skipped, my breath catching in my throat. I froze, my grip tightening on the rifle. The sound came again, quieter this time, but unmistakable. Someone, or something, was here. I moved toward the noise, slow and steady, each step deliberate. The hallway ahead was a tunnel of shadows, the faint outlines of doorways on either side. I kept to the center, ready to raise my rifle at the first sign of movement. The sound led me to a room near the end of the hall. The door hung ajar, and I could just make out a figure slumped against the far wall. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure stirred, lifting its head. It was a man, his face gaunt and pale, his clothes tattered and soaked in blood. One of his legs was bent at an unnatural angle, and the floor beneath him was dark with a spreading stain. "Don't!" he rasped, his voice barely more than a breath. "Don't what?" I asked, stepping into the room. "Don't stay," he said, his hollow eyes locking onto mine. "It doesn't forgive mistakes." "What doesn't?" I kept my voice calm, but my pulse was hammering. He let out a weak, bitter laugh. "You'll see." Before I could say another word, a metallic screech echoed through the building. The sound was sharp, jagged, like nails dragged across steel, and it seemed to come from everywhere at once. My blood ran cold. "What was that?" I asked, my voice tight. "It's here," he whispered. His head slumped forward, and I wasn't sure if he'd passed out or died. The screech came again, closer this time, followed by a rhythmic clanging, like something heavy being dragged across the floor. I backed out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway felt narrower than before, the shadows deeper. My hand shook as I reached for the chalk, drawing a shaky arrow on the wall. I needed to get out. The sound was louder now, accompanied by a low, guttural growl. I moved as quickly and quietly as I could, my boots barely skimming the ground. My breath came in shallow bursts, my eyes darting to every flicker of movement. I rounded a corner and froze. Something massive was standing at the end of the hallway. Its body was a twisted amalgamation of flesh and metal, its jagged limbs dragging against the floor. Its head tilted toward me, and its glowing eyes burned like embers in the darkness. I didn't wait to see what it would do. I turned and ran, my boots pounding against the concrete, the sound echoing like a drumbeat. Behind me, the screeching grew louder, and I could hear the thing picking up speed. The hallway twisted and turned, the arrows I'd marked barely visible in the dim light. My chest burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop. The screeching was deafening now, and I could feel the vibrations in the floor as the thing closed in. I rounded another corner and skidded to a stop. A dead end. My mind raced as I searched for another way out, my fingers fumbling with the chalk. I scrawled another arrow on the wall, praying I'd find another path. The sound stopped. I turned, my rifle raised, but the hallway was empty. The silence was worse than the noise. It pressed down on me, thick and suffocating. My eyes darted to the shadows, searching for any sign of movement. And then I saw it. A glint of metal in the darkness, followed by the faintest hint of a grin. I didn't dare move. The grin floated in the shadows, the metallic glint catching faint shafts of light that filtered through the cracks in the building's decaying walls. My heart thudded against my ribs like a prisoner pounding to escape. The screeching sound had stopped, but that didn't mean it was gone. It was waiting. Watching. The hall was a tomb, the silence pressing against my ears until I thought I might scream just to break it. Slowly, I backed up, careful not to step on anything that could give me away. Every muscle in my body screamed to run, but I knew better. Running would make noise, and noise was the language of death in this place. I reached a side door, pushing it open just enough to slip through. The hinges groaned faintly, and I froze, holding my breath as my pulse hammered in my ears. The grin disappeared into the dark. It was moving. I ducked into the room and pressed my back against the wall, forcing my breathing to slow. The room was filled with rusted metal shelving and broken crates. A faint light spilled through a crack in the ceiling, just enough to cast long, jagged shadows over the walls. I edged toward the opposite side of the room, trying to find another exit. My foot hit something, a stray bolt, and it skittered across the floor, the sound impossibly loud in the stillness. A screech pierced the air, a high-pitched metallic wail that set my teeth on edge. The grin was back, just outside the door. It moved into the room, its glowing eyes burning like molten steel. The creature was massive, its body a grotesque fusion of flesh and twisted machinery. Metal jutted from its shoulders like blades, and its claws dragged along the ground, sending sparks skittering across the concrete. Its movements were erratic, jerking, as though it were constantly fighting to control itself. I didn't have time to think. It lunged, faster than anything that size should be capable of. I dove behind one of the rusted shelves, the impact of its claws sending metal crashing around me. The noise was deafening, a symphony of destruction that reverberated through the building. I scrambled to my feet, darting toward the door on the far side of the room. The creature roared, a guttural, inhuman sound that sent chills racing down my spine. I barely made it through the door before it slammed into the wall behind me, the force shaking the ground beneath my feet. The hallway stretched ahead like an endless tunnel, each step echoing as I sprinted toward what I hoped was an exit. The screeching followed me, growing louder with every second. I risked a glance over my shoulder and saw it barreling down the hall, its claws tearing into the walls as it moved. My chest burned, my legs felt like lead, but I couldn't stop. Not here. Not like this. I rounded a corner and slammed into a heavy metal door. My hands fumbled with the latch, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature's roar echoed down the hall, and I could hear the scrape of its claws getting closer. The latch finally gave, and I shoved the door open, throwing myself inside. I slammed it shut and slid a rusted metal pipe through the handles, hoping it would hold. The room was dark, the only light coming from a faint green glow in the corner. My hands shook as I pulled out the chalk and marked an arrow on the floor, even though I wasn't sure I'd live long enough to follow it. The screeching stopped. I pressed my ear to the door, straining to hear. The silence was worse than the noise. It felt alive, coiling around me like a predator waiting to strike. Then the pounding started. The creature slammed into the door, each impact sending vibrations through the room. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and I could hear the metal groaning under the strain. I backed away, my rifle raised, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. The door bent inward with each hit, the pipe splintering under the force. I glanced around the room, desperate for another way out. In the corner, a rusted ladder led to a hatch in the ceiling. The door gave way, the creature bursting through in a shower of metal and debris. It roared, its glowing eyes locking onto me. I fired, the shot echoing like thunder in the confined space. The bullet struck its chest, but it didn't even flinch. It charged, its claws ripping through the air inches from my face. I dove for the ladder, scrambling upward as fast as I could. The metal groaned under my weight, and I could feel the creature's breath on my back as it swiped at me. I reached the hatch and shoved it open, pulling myself through just as the creature slammed into the ladder. The entire structure buckled, and I rolled onto the roof, gasping for air. Below, the creature roared, its claws scraping against the walls as it tried to climb after me. The industrial complex stretched out below me, a maze of crumbling buildings and broken pathways. Somewhere out there was my way out, if I could survive long enough to find it. The rooftop stretched wide before me, a barren expanse of cracked concrete and jagged metal. Every breath burned in my chest, but I kept moving, even as the creature's guttural roar echoed behind me. Its footsteps were thunderous, relentless, and impossibly close. I glanced back just as it hauled itself onto the roof. The monster was worse up close, its face twisted in a permanent grin that split its mangled flesh, its glowing eyes fixed on me with a terrifying intensity. The metal protrusions from its body gleamed dully in the low light, streaked with rust and gore. It roared again, the sound reverberating through my skull, and I bolted, my boots pounding against the unsteady surface. The rifle in my hands felt useless. I'd seen bullets bounce off its thick, unnatural hide. There was no killing it. My only option was to stay ahead, and even that was slipping away. The gap between the rooftops loomed ahead, a chasm of empty air and certain death. My legs burned, but I pushed harder, my pulse thundering in my ears. I didn't slow down. Slowing down wasn't an option. I jumped. For a second, everything was silent. The world suspended in a breathless void. Then I hit the far edge, my hands scrabbling for purchase against the crumbling ledge. Pain flared through my shoulder as I hauled myself up, dirt and gravel biting into my palms. Behind me, the creature roared and leapt. It landed hard, the impact sending cracks spidering through the concrete. I rolled away, barely avoiding its swipe, the tips of its claws catching my jacket and ripping through the fabric. Blood seeped from the shallow gashes on my arm, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The roof ahead was a mess of broken pipes and twisted metal, a graveyard of industrial decay. I weaved through the debris, the creature smashing through it like it was paper. Its roar was deafening, its glowing eyes fixed on me with unrelenting fury. I ducked behind a vent, trying to catch my breath, but it was no use. The monster barreled toward me, and I only just managed to throw myself out of its path. Its claws struck the vent, shredding it in an explosion of metal shards. "Damn it," I muttered, scrambling to my feet. My legs screamed in protest, but I forced it to move. The edge of the roof was near. No more escape routes. No more second chances. The creature stalked toward me, its movements slow and deliberate now. It knew it had me. I gripped my rifle, my hands trembling. The faint chalk markings I'd left on the rooftops mocked me, arrows pointing to a path that no longer mattered. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the chalk. My fingers were steady as I knelt and scrawled a final message on the concrete. The creature tilted its head, its grin widening as it watched me, mocking me. I stood and faced it, my chest heaving. "You don't win," I said, my voice low. "Not yet." It lunged and I jumped, the air rushing past me as I fell. The impact with the ground knocked the wind from my lungs, pain exploding through my body. I forced myself up, dragging my broken body toward the shadows of the industrial complex. I didn't look back. The creature's roar echoed above me, frustrated and furious. It wouldn't follow. Not yet. I knew it would, though. They always did. As I limped away, I thought about the chalk scrawl I'd left on the rooftop. Simple, deliberate, and final. Rule 20. There are no second chances. I'd survived this time, but out here, one mistake is all it takes, and the dead don't forgive.